Comrades, good morning. My name's Edward Ray. This is why you can't get hired and what you're going to do about it. There are people twice as talented as you or I who never get hired, and people half as talented who consistently do. The title of this talk may have given you some preconceptions. Allow me to dismantle those preemptively. This is not a set of motivational feel-good aphorisms. If you do leave feeling motivated, all the better. Either way, I'm here to tell you some of the things many others skirt around. You'll leave this talk with a model, 3 principles that will shape how you approach every pitch and opportunity henceforth. Now, you've likely seen my title card and yet still have no clue who I am. Let's indulge that formality. I'm a freelance composer and audio specialist. I've worked on multiple VR titles co-published by Meta, scored European television, and led audio on cross-platform games. Still, Edward Ray, never heard of him. I'm not some towering industry veteran with a dozen AAA titles. You knew that when you saw my name, and I assure you, no one else recognized it either. I know you don't know who I am, but I've spent the past few years not just working, but observing. More importantly, I've also sat on the other side of the table. I've helped vet applicants, handled pipelines, managed deadlines, and shipped under pressure. The part that actually matters here is that I've worked consistently, nearly every week since I started. What I'm sharing today doesn't come from theory. It comes from experience and pattern recognition, from watching who gets hired and who doesn't. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that talent is an infinitesimal part of the equation. Now, I could ask how many of you applied to more than 10 roles this year, or how many of you heard back from fewer than half, but I don't need to, because you're in this talk. We're all in a sea of noise, and until we face that, we can't address it. And until we address it, nothing changes. A statistic claims that 80% of freelancers don't earn more than minimum wage. Impossible to corroborate, but what we can say is that most never will. This isn't for a lack of skills or talent. It's because no one knows what problem they solve. Their value proposition lacks clarity, authority, or consequence. Let's examine why. Recently, I heard from an old collaborator of mine, someone I've been keen to work with again. The timing didn't align due to my current commitment, so as a concession, he asked whether I'd be willing to help him vet the other composer applicants, to which I agreed. This presented a timely opportunity to see yet again how fellow audio professionals pitch themselves. What I found was revealing. Let's look at a few examples. I'm a passionate composer with experience in orchestral, ambient, and electronic styles, would love to be involved. Flexible on rates, just excited to work on something cool. Here's my reel. It features tracks from my latest EP and some redesigns I did for fun. Now, I recognize the voice behind them because that was me when I was still figuring out how to show up in the industry, professionally, creatively, personally. I had no edge, clarity, or identity, just enthusiasm. Keeping in mind, some of these people weren't juniors. Many claimed 10+ years of tenure. Over 24 applicants, and not a single one stood out. Now, you might think, so what? They wrote polite emails. I'll clarify. It's not just the tone. It's what the tone reveals. Fear, a smallness. It signals someone trying to avoid rejection by rejecting their own identity. A benign, saccharine, pick-me energy exudes from them. These weren't so much offers as they were preemptive apologies, because they weren't pitching themselves, they were asking for permission. We choose this career because we want to inject our personalities into our work, and then we stop at the product. We forget the work isn't just in the air that the speakers are moving, it's in how we show up, in how we communicate. It's in everything we do. We can't afford to be courageous with audio and then meek with everything else, crafting sonic identities for imaginary worlds, but then erasing our own identities when it comes to how we present ourselves. You pour your heart and soul into your DAW and then send an email that sounds like a placeholder from a student portfolio site, overseasoned with enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, it's a bit like salt. A little bit is good, too much leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth. We say we want to stand out, but then every move we make outside the work screams, please, approve of me. You cannot build a formidable, sustainable career whilst diluting your identity. Worse yet, This sort of language doesn't just sound weak, it actually reads as low competence. A Harvard and Columbia study on social perception found that the way we present ourselves, especially through tentative or overly polite language, has a measurable effect on how capable we're perceived to be. So when people hedge, soften, or apologize in their communication, their interlocutor subconsciously associates them with lower confidence, lower authority, and therefore lower value. If your work is bold, your presence has to be bolder. If your sound has weight, your language has got to have spine. Yes, you're auditioning your skills, but you're also broadcasting your self-belief. And if you don't sound convinced, why should anyone else be? Talent isn't the bottleneck. In creative fields, most decisions are not made through technical comparisons. They're made on instinct and pattern recognition. If you don't communicate the problem you solve, no one will believe you can solve it. You need to stop broadcasting that you need permission and start reassuring that you're already part of the solution. Don't list genres like a menu and hope one lands. Speak to the world they are building and show how your ear supports it. When you lead with certainty, you make it easy to say yes, but when you hedge, you become a liability. Clarity signals competence. Competence reduces risk. Most clients don't know how to judge audio. They're definitely not comparing your modulation techniques. They're deciding whether you reduce risk. But if you come across as vague, needy, or generic, then you are. You're not being passed over for someone more talented. You're being passed over for someone who felt like less of a gamble because they read like a solution, not a question mark. Thus, your job isn't to impress, it's to remove that uncertainty. And the most powerful way to do that is to speak like someone who already belongs. There's a psychological principle known as the ambiguity effect, a bias where people tend to avoid options with unknown outcomes, even when those options might be better. In hiring terms, it means this. If you lack clarity, you're an unknown quantity. And if you're vague, you're invisible. Studios will choose the applicant who's clearer, even if they're marginally less skilled. Why? Because our brains are wired to favor certainty over ambiguity. You need to stop describing yourself as a bundle of loose potential and start describing yourself as the answer to a problem. A couple of examples for you. I'm an audio professional with experience across music, sound design, and implementation. It's not bad, but we need to be more assertive. I help teams build cohesive, memorable soundscapes fast and without friction. Make it about the problem you solve. Let me know if you'd like to chat. Odds are, if you say that, no one will. Instead, if the project is still taking shape, I can build a short audio sketch this week to show you how I'd approach it. These, as you can see, are not radical changes. They're upgrades to your perceived value, rooted in clarity and assertiveness. The industry isn't ignoring you because you lack talent. You're here, so you're clearly serious about your craft. It's ignoring you because you're forgettable. Most reels look the same. Most bios read like they were written by an LLM with imposter syndrome. Again, safe, polite, replaceable. Trying so hard to blend in, that's precisely what they're doing. In a stack of 50 reels, it's the one with an edge that cuts through, the one with taste, identity, nerve. That's who gets remembered. I was once asked to pitch for a VR shooter. I received the brief for the demo, and I didn't submit a second of music. Instead, I wrote a detailed report on why their brief was completely off the mark. They hired me on the spot, giving me a blank slate, telling me to do whatever I thought was best. Now, I didn't show them anything in terms of actual audio. I was hired because I disagreed, clearly, respectfully, and with taste. That's what made me stand out, and therefore, what made me useful. Psychologists call it the von Restorff effect. We remember what breaks the pattern and tend to forget all else. So if you sound like everyone else, you've already lost, because good is forgettable. Different is what sticks. Now, this isn't me making the case for arrogance. I'm inviting you to be lucid, to own the shape of what you do, even if it doesn't fit everyone's brief, especially if it doesn't fit everyone's brief. When you hide behind polite generalities and play it safe, you become a commodity, and commodities don't get hired, they get price shopped, and that's how we've ended up to a race to the bottom on rates. Couple of further examples. Here's my general reel. Let me know what stands out. Not assertive enough. Instead, here's a 90-second cut I built specifically for dark narrative games. It's slow burn, cinematic, and ends with a thematic gut punch. Let me know if that's what you're after. Proactive and memorable. I'm a flexible composer who can adapt to any style. Well, I don't think this conference is short of those. Instead, I have analyzed the brief. Here is what is working, here is what isn't, here is how I would solve that problem. That should sound familiar. Most people are trying not to get ruled out. We need to try to stand out. So if you want to get hired, don't simply qualify, disturb the pattern. This is all very well. Now, what do we do with it? Well, as you now know, you don't get hired just because you're good, but because you're remembered. Thousands of skilled professionals disappear into the noise every single day. And that's not because they lack merit, it's because they never left an impression. They rounded off their edges to appeal to everyone, and in doing so, stood for nothing. You don't become memorable by being agreeable. You also don't get referred for being technically clean. That's expected, it's the baseline. You'll get hired and referred because you instilled confidence, because your positioning was clear, your taste unmistakable, and because your presence sharpened the room. The availability heuristic shows we act based on what we remember, not what's necessarily objectively best. We know that now. Therefore, being the most skilled doesn't necessarily make you the first choice. Being the clearest, boldest, most distinct version of yourself does. If a studio can't remember you, they won't hire you. If they can't describe you, they won't return or refer you. And if your portfolio doesn't provoke conversation, it dies in silence. If there's one thing that I'd really like you to take away from this short talk this morning, it's the following. The next time you sit down to update your website copy, write an email, or reach out to someone as the result of having seen an opening, I hope you employ this thought process. If I wasn't afraid to act in the way I wanted, what is the worst possible thing the person on the receiving end could think of me if they looked at it in the worst possible light? And then, don't act, double down, then act. Let people misunderstand you. Let them say you're too stylized, too weird, or too intense. That just means you've left an imprint. Better a raised eyebrow than a glazed over glance. Most people are trying to appear capable. We have to be unmistakable. That's what being hireable really means. A level of alignment between your values, your work, and your delivery that can't be faked and cannot be ignored. 5 years ago, I was a project manager at a medical devices company. I'm sure you don't know what that entails, but you probably know enough to know it doesn't get you very far in audio. The day I decided to leave, I was halfway through a PowerPoint on catheter risk factors. And I looked out the window and realized, gosh, if I die in this chair, my eulogy will be a quarterly report. And that's when I had this masochistic idea. What if I were to start all over again? No mentor, no trust funds, no qualifications, no clear path forward, just me, Reaper, and the terrifying idea that I'm probably too late. That, as I say, was 5 years ago. Today, I'm audio lead on an upcoming FIFA title. Ah, there it is, another lucky break. Yes, luck is always a factor, but luck without readiness is utterly worthless. As the cliche goes, luck is where hard work meets opportunity. So the harder and more deliberately you work, the more opportunities you will have. Generally, when people say they're unlucky, it's usually because they haven't cultivated the volume, velocity, or visibility for luck to find them. So why aren't you getting hired? Well, you're waiting to be noticed and afraid to be remembered. Rejection isn't your obstacle. Obscurity is the enemy. And sincerity, when it fails to transmute into proposition, becomes its closest ally. The market doesn't reward virtue, good ideas, or the safety of consensus. It rewards execution with teeth. When someone says, I've tried everything, what they usually mean is, I did what felt safe. They only work when they're inspired, and upon bearing no fruit, they turn on the world or the gatekeepers. It's rarely the mirror. When you're really doing the work, you don't chase applause. You absorb resistance and take friction in stride. You're not owed results for being earnest, passionate, or talented. Rather, you earn them through relentlessness. The truth is, most people, they never find out what they're capable of. They retreat just enough to say, well, I didn't go all in. That's how the ego survives, intact and untested. We need to make the harder choice and accept the truth that most can't. You might do everything right and still not succeed. If, however, you can stomach that, then all that's left to do is to execute. And that is what you're going to do about it. Thank you.